Hi there, my name is Jason Fraser. I am a meteorologist with the NBC affiliate in Cleveland, Ohio, and welcome to lesson 3. Today we're going to be talking about fronts, cold fronts, warm fronts, and how they basically transform our weather into some of the storms that you see each and every day. But of course, I like to start off with something funny. The joke of the day for today is, what do you call a bear that is wet? Five, four, three, two, one. You would call that bear a drizzly bear. Get it? Drizzle, bear, wet. Okay. Listen, they pay me to tell the weather, not jokes. So, as always, I love your weather questions. You can feel free to leave a comment right here at the bottom of the page, or you can always send me an email at jfraser@wkyc.com. That is jfraser@wkyc.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram or on Facebook at Jason Fraser TV, and I soon as I can. So let's go over what our class outline is going to be for today. Today, we're going to be discussing air masses. What exactly is an air mass and what is a front and why does it matter in our overall atmosphere? We're also going to be talking about how a front creates rainstorms as well as thunderstorms. Ready to go? All right, let's go. So I'd also like to not only say hello to you today, but I also want to say hello to air. Yeah, it's the thing that we can feel against our skin. Sometimes we can even smell it too, but it's just kind of there. Now, have you ever noticed that air can be very different depending on the time of day and also where you are? The air is different here in Cleveland, Ohio in the middle of February versus in the middle of the summer. So they're different. It's all because of something called air masses. Now, air masses are sections of air that have the same temperature and moisture. Now, some air masses only stay in one particular area of the world, and some air masses actually move from one part of the world to another. So you may notice, for example, like in the tropics, it's always very warm there. That's because they have very warm air masses. But if you travel to some place that's really cold, let's say Antarctica or the Arctic Circle, it's usually always cold there. And that's always because they tend to have air masses of the same temperature as well. So, speaking of hot places like the tropics, dry air masses are found in places where it's really warm and dry. Think of a place like a desert, for example. That's usually where you would find a dry air mass. Some place that's maybe wet, for example, maybe like a beach, and you saw a storm that's approaching. That would be an example of a place where you would find a wet air mass. Now, there are also places where you can find cold and dry air masses, like the places that I had mentioned before, like in Antarctica, for example, because it's so cold, there's just not really a lot of water vapor. Now, here's the thing. Air masses, back in the day, they used to be best friends. They used to be just like this. But now air masses, they don't like each other. They're kind of like water and oil. Okay. No matter what you do, no matter how much water you pour into a glass, if you notice, it never likes to mix with the oil. So I'm going to put a little oil in here just to help illustrate this here for you. So boom, you put some oil in there. Look at that. We got some oil and some water. I love doing this stuff. But if you notice right there at the top, that's where all the oil is right there. And even though I pour in some more water, yeah, they don't ever really like to mix. The oil likes to stay at the top. And so that's pretty much what air masses do. They pretty much either move each other along or they try to avoid each other. And if they try to go into the same area, some pretty crazy things happen weather-wise. All right, so That's the reason why we have boundaries. All right. So air masses don't really like to be in the same place. So we have boundaries in the atmosphere, and we refer to those boundaries as fronts. Now, on your screen, you may see something familiar that I use on the TV. So we have warm fronts, we have cold fronts, we have occluded fronts, and then we have stationary fronts. And actually make this bigger so that you can actually see it right there on your screen there. I'm only today, because this is a very basic level meteorology course, I'm only going to talk about warm fronts and cold fronts. But just so that you know, usually in the United States, most fronts move from west to east. And that's all because of our winds. Usually you have a warm front and a cold front. They'll usually move from the left of a map to the right of a map. Now, every now and then there's some crazy stuff that happens where you'll actually have a cold front move backwards. And that's why we call it a backdoor cold front. I'm not going to get into why that happens, but just so that you know, it does periodically happen. So let's talk a little bit about what warm fronts are and why they basically happen in the world. All right, so warm fronts basically are when you have warm air that invades where cold air used to be. So let's say, for example, this cotton ball right here, let's see right here, this is cold air, right? Cold air basically is leaving, and then warm air basically moves into the same spot. Now, periodically, what will happen is you'll have the cold front, or I should say the cold air, that doesn't really want to move, but the warm front still wants to get in there. And as you can see in that graphic, what ends up happening is that warm air that's right here starts to move up. And it sort of kind of looks like a little conveyor belt, right? I know, I know. I love doing stuff like this. I love drawing actually on the thing. Can you tell? All right. So what generally will happen there is that gray stuff that you see right there, that's cloud cover that's developing. So anytime you have a warm front that's moving in and you still have some cold air that's there, you're going to start to notice some clouds that are going. Now, this is another graphic that I can use to really describe what's happening. So again, you're going to have a warm front that's going to basically start moving in. And then if we still have some cold air in that place that it doesn't really want to move, that's when you start to get some cloud cover. And you could potentially end up seeing some rain showers as well. So here's a cool little table that I developed here about warm fronts. So what happens before the warm front, temperature wise, you usually will experience very cool and cold weather, right? But then after the warm front moves where you are, it tends to be warmer. All right. Now, sometimes before warm front, you can have light to heavy rain showers. But usually after the warm front moves right through your area, usually you don't see anything. There's no rain. It's usually very clear in the sky. Now, I want to share a little secret with you. If ever you want to maybe figure out where the warm fronts are, and you don't have a weather map or I'm not around, you can look up way up in the sky. And if you see these cirrus clouds, remember what those are? Those are those little squiggly looking clouds. They look like the mozzarella cheese, remember, being pulled apart. Sometimes what you can actually do with very warm weather is you can actually look very high up in the sky and you can see those cirrus clouds. And that usually means that that's some much warmer air that's going to be moving through over the next 24 hours. The other thing, when warm fronts move through your area that you'll notice is that the winds will start to change direction as well. Before warm front moves into your area, you may have the winds that are moving either out of the east or from the southeast. But then once that warm front moves over your area, you'll notice that the winds start to change. They'll move from the south or the southeast to potentially the south or the southwest. It's pretty. Now that we've talked about warm fronts, let's talk a little bit about cold fronts. And again, I just want to remind you, cold air, warm air, they don't really like each other. It all happened back in the day. I guess apparently cold air basically told the warm air that their breath was really hot and stunk. And then that's when warm air basically said to cold air, you know what, you're really cold and I don't really like you. And ever since then, they just don't like each other. So what happens is whenever you get these two types of air masses together, that's when you normally start to see some storms form and whatnot. And it's pretty cool to see this happen. Now, you may have been maybe in your backyard or in a park and things are fine. It's warm. And then all of a sudden, you notice you start to feel that colder air on your skin, start to feel that cold breeze. Then it starts to get cloudy and then it starts pouring. That is a cold front that was moving through your area. And this actually happens a lot during the summer. And we also see this during the winter with snow as well. So what happens is you have cold air that basically moves in to an area. And if the warm air hasn't moved out, it actually will start to push some of the warm air upwards. And that's when you start to get these really, 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 really tall clouds, these cumulonimbus clouds, and they look really dark and scary. And sometimes you can even experience hail and major thunderstorms with cold fronts. We see this a lot of times during the spring as well as summer months. Now, just like with the chart that I warm fronts, I also created one for cold fronts. So we talked a little bit about temperature. Before a cold front moves in, it tends to be warmer, right? You're outside, you're experiencing life, you're loving it, you're great, you're wonderful. And then that cold front comes through, and then it's cold. And then you're gonna need a coat. Then with precipitation, usually before a cold front moves through, it's normally very dry. Normally you're fine. Maybe you might experience a few clouds, a few cumulus clouds, but overall you tend to be fine in terms of cloud cover. During a cold front moving through, usually what will happen is you will experience some type of precipitation. Not always. We do have what we call dry cold fronts, but usually you will experience some form of moisture. And then after then, things are usually fine. They're usually clear. All right. So I talked a little bit about the clouds that you experience before cold fronts as well as when they pass. And then with the winds, you'll also tend to see a shift in winds as well. So usually with cold fronts, right before they move through your area, the winds will be coming, it'll either be an easterly wind or southwesterly wind. And after the cold front moves through it, it'll normally be either a westerly wind or a northwesterly wind. Why from the north? Well, that's usually where the cold air is. All right, so we talked a little bit about air masses and fronts and warm fronts and cold fronts and whatnot. Hopefully, you learned something new today. Now, tomorrow, we're going to be talking a little bit about tornadoes and what causes them and what you should be doing to remain safe when there's either a tornado watch issue. As always, I love, 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 love your questions. You can feel free to tag me on Instagram, Facebook, as well as Twitter. I even will answer some Snapchat questions about the weather at Jason Fraser TV is how you can find me. Or you can always feel free to drop me an email at jfraser at wkyc.com. And one last thing, if you are watching this on Facebook, just want to let you know that the lesson will automatically post here within 5 minutes and you'll be able to play it from the top again. You can also go to our website, wkyc.com, and a copy not only of the handouts, but also this lesson is on there. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. And again, tomorrow, right around this time, we'll produce another lesson about tornadoes. I've had fun. Hopefully, you have too. And hopefully, you've also learned something too. Have a great day.